Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Smart Divorce podcast. And I'm very happy to welcome back one of our previous and very popular guests, Caron Kipping. Hi Caron, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for asking.
No problem at all. So Caron is a survivor of domestic abuse and a master practitioner divorce coach specialising in abusive and coercive relationships. She's worked for many years within the charity sector, overseeing a team of IDVAs. We'll talk more about that shortly, and managing high-risk cases of domestic abuse. Caron is also the author of the fabulous book, which I recommend all the time, called Recognition to Recovery: How to Leave Your Abusive Ex Behind for Good, and is passionate about raising awareness of coercive control. So I'm massively looking forward to this conversation because I have spoken to Caron many times, and including having recorded on the podcast before, but this is a topic that we've not discussed before, and you know I've fessed up many times that I am incredibly naive about this area, but I'm trying to learn much more, because I work with people all of the time who are victim survivors of domestic abuse, who many times are only actually coming to the realization that they've been in an abusive relationship after they've already left. But I want to try and speak today about some of the support that's available to women and men in this situation. So we're going to talk about IDVAs today. So first of all, obvious basic question: what is an IDVA?
So first of all, I would like to say thank you for choosing this as a topic, because this is actually a question I get asked a lot. You know, what is an IDVA or an IDVA, you know, however you want to say it. You know, even police officers, social workers, housing officers sometimes say, you know, what's an IDVA? And I have to roll my eyes and say, well, you should really know what an IDVA is. But anyway, so an IDVA stands for Independent Domestic Violence Advocate. So it's a professional qualification. You have to do quite a lot of work. You have to usually be working with high-risk survivors of domestic abuse, usually within the charitable sector for an organisation like Women's Aid or Refuge, or one of those kind of charitable specialist organisations, when you do the course. And then you have to do quite a lot of work and case studies, etc. And then you get your certificate, your professional qualification at the end. And the role of an IDVA really is to reduce the risk as quickly as possible for high-risk survivors of domestic abuse, men or women, right? People that are at kind of imminent risk of danger from their partner or their ex-partner or a family member. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a direct partner. It could be a parent, it could be a sibling, you know. So it's all those different dynamics of domestic abuse that we are trained in dealing with. And so we're really the specialists in terms of being able to recognise serious risk of harm, safety planning as a follow-up to that, really looking at where that survivor is in terms of their understanding of domestic abuse and understanding what they want from the relationship. You know, are they ready to separate? Are they not? Do they still feel like they love that person? You know, so we do a lot of motivational interviewing. So a lot of work trying to get them to recognise the risk that they're at, understand the dynamics of their relationship, and come to terms with, you know, the fact that it's not a healthy relationship, essentially, and to get them to think about making decisions and prioritising their needs above the needs of the abuser, okay? And also looking at safeguarding. So IDVAs traditionally work in partnership with other professional agencies. So they might link in with police or social services or health or housing. So it's really looking at the whole picture. So, you know, if you go to a solicitor will give you advice based on the legal aspects, you know, what your rights are legally, you know, what you can do in terms of civil law, criminal law, right? But they might not necessarily take into consideration other things that are going on in your life. You know, you might have a really limited support network. You might have children that have got additional needs. You might not feel like you can move to the other end of the country, you know, to go into a refuge.
Yeah.
You know, so it's really looking at all of the options and helping that survivor weigh up the pros and cons of the options and really looking at empowering them to make their own choices, to take control back over their life and to make decisions that are right for them. And at the same time, an IDVA is an advocate. So we are able to speak up for that person if they're not able to do so. So again, traditionally, we would sit in on child protection meetings, safeguarding meetings. We might contact the police on their behalf to get updates. You know, so it's really being that key person that can coordinate all of the agencies that might be relevant for that person and create this whole support team, if you like, to help reduce the risk and support that survivor as much as possible. So an IDVA can be really useful in terms of contacting other professionals that might help you, rather than that survivor having to do all the legwork and make numerous calls and retell their story over and over again to each individual person. And sometimes when you get an advocate speaking up on your behalf, other professionals will listen, right? Whereas if it's a survivor, sometimes it's hard for them to articulate how they feel. It's hard for them to speak up and find the confidence to do that. And it, you know, particularly when that relationship is coercive and there's not a lot of tangible evidence, it can quite often be lost. You know, it's just like one person's word against the other. So in terms of what an IDVA does, it's really looking at risk first, safety planning, then looking at what support is needed for that individual. What do they want to happen? You know, do they want the relationship to end? Do they want to move out? Do they want the other person to move out? What kind of support do they need? What support have they already got? What are they struggling with? What's going well? So it's looking at all of that and keeping in regular contact with that person so that they know they've got that support. And you know, again, traditionally, most IDVAs work within the charitable sector. Now, this sounds great, you know, in theory, that, you know, people can access this IDVA support. Now, the downside is that it is a bit of a postcode lottery. It depends on where you live as to what support you can actually access, because they are charitable organisations. We've lost a lot of funding over the years, and you know, services change all the time, so the types of support that they can offer does vary from place to place and time to time. So you do have to try and keep on top of what's available in your area if you're a professional working with clients like this. Now, some services will be able to offer support for high risk survivors. Some will be able to offer support for high risk survivors and, you know, those at medium risk where the risk is not so evident, but they're still having a lot of challenges. Some will be able to offer support groups, which are great, right? But they might only be able to offer support groups for specific types of cases. You know, it depends on how they're funded. And an IDVA traditionally will work with somebody quite intensely for about 12 weeks. And you would hope that within that 12 weeks, you would be able to reduce the risk down quite significantly and get them all the help that they need. And then off they go and, you know, try and manage the rest of their situation with a bit of ongoing support, maybe from other organisations, other professionals. Now, I diversified from being an IDVA working within the charitable sector to being a divorce coach with that IDVA experience. And the reason why I did that was because there is a gap, you know, there is a gap in the support that is available for people. You know, everything isn't done and dusted within 12 weeks quite often. You know what it's like. No, when you're going through financial proceedings, when you're going through family court, that takes months. You know, sometimes it can take a couple of years. And so that person needs that ongoing support, but the charitable sector can't necessarily offer that because they just don't have the capacity to do that. So that's where my coaching services and peer support groups, you know, came in. And as an IDVA now, the law has changed to allow IDVAs to be able to support survivors within the family court, to be able to sit in court with them and to be able to offer that quiet advice and guidance and make sure that they feel more supported in that situation. However, again, the downside is IDVAs within the charitable sector really can't offer that right now because they just don't have capacity. You know, they are managing 25 cases usually at a time as a minimum. Okay. Wow. And they are high risk cases. So very intense work. They don't have capacity to sit for a whole day in court or 3 to 5 days for a fact-finding hearing. You know, they just don't have that capacity to do that. So that's where my IDVA experience can be really useful because I can do that for clients. You know, unfortunately, you know, not everybody's going to be able to access it because it is a paid for service, but I try and keep those costs reasonable to make sure that people can access that support. But it is a really valuable service, and I really wish that more IDVAs would be able to do that. I think there is going to be some funding coming available to train up, I think 300 IDVAs across the country for family court support, and most of those IDVAs will be coming from the charitable sector, which will be great because, you know, I just think it's great that they put this in place, but they haven't really thought through the practicalities of how that's going to happen. So they definitely need to invest more funding into the charitable sector if that's going to work.
Absolutely.
So that's quite a new thing that IDVAs are allowed to do that. But that's essentially what IDVAs do. They, you know, and I've still got links with safeguarding and with my local domestic abuse sector. So we kind of cross-refer in and out. And, you know, I can refer into professional meetings for high-risk clients to look at getting that multi-agency support.
Yeah, absolutely. So many questions just from what you've just said. So I want to start with a relatively basic question. How are we defining risk levels? So what does high risk mean?
Yeah. So you define risk level by there's a risk assessment tool that we use as IDVAs. Okay. It's called the DASH risk assessment. So domestic abuse, stalking and harassment risk assessment. Yeah. It's the same tool that most police officers use. Some forces have changed to a different tool, but traditionally we've all used this same tool of reference, really. And some social workers are trained to use it as well. Basically, it's a set of 24 questions that we ask. And these questions are based on research. You know, they are predictors of serious harm, you know, because perpetrators of domestic abuse all do very similar things. You know, they all say and do very similar things. And there are certain things that they will do, certain behaviours that they have that will lead on to more serious harm. So they are very clear predictors. You know, if you look at women that have died through domestic abuse, there are certain things that happen in the lead up to that, and they're very common across all these cases. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to predict what level of harm a person is at. And so we tick the boxes, yes and no. All right.
Okay.
And we also bring professional judgment into it. You know, what do we feel as IDVAs are risk factors? So there might be certain things that that happen, that a person experiences, or, you know, something in their background that makes us believe that they are at serious risk of harm. And it's, if you're looking at the number of tick boxes, somebody that ticks 14 out of 24 would be considered high risk, right? Anything above 14 and above is high risk, right? Anything kind of between 8 and 14 is medium risk, all right? And then standard risk would be below that.
Okay.
Most people generally fall into the standard risk category, but there are certain people that will fall into the high risk category, and they are definitely at risk of significant harm. So they definitely need more support than I could offer as a coach, right? They need safeguarding help. They need help from police, maybe they need help from housing, or, you know, they need more intense support to make sure that they're not at risk.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Okay. So we're, you know, high risk is pretty, pretty
so
damn serious.
it's about asking those key questions to tease out information from that survivor, because that survivor doesn't necessarily know what level of risk they're at. They might be scared, but everybody's perception of being scared is different. So you have to drill down a little bit and ask really key questions. So, okay, if you're scared, what are you scared of? Are you worried that they're going to harm you? Have they made any threats to you before? Have they got access to weapons at all? You know, are they financially abusive? Have they ever threatened to take the children from you? Or what, you know, have they ever threatened suicide? Have they ever threatened to kill you? So real kind of key questions.
Yeah.
And then it's not just asking those key questions, it's teasing out even more information to get a real sense of what's happened in the past, you know, and what might come in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Does the questionnaire also link to legal aid, and does it also link to how the police work with that person, what their involvement is?
Yeah, so you wouldn't get a copy of the risk assessment as such from an IDVA that works within a charitable organisation. It's a confidential document, you know, and it should be, right? But what that IDVA can do is they can write a supporting letter for legal aid purposes to say, this person has come to our service, we've professionally risk assessed them, we believe that they are a survivor of domestic abuse or coercive control, and we're happy to support their legal aid application. Right, that's one of the pieces of evidence that you can use to support your legal aid application. I can't do that because I'm an independent IDVA. I don't work for an organisation, and the parameters at the moment are only for charitable organisations.
Okay.
For police have specialist domestic abuse officers. So they have departments that solely deal with domestic abuse. Yeah. And for you to access support and protection from those police officers, you do generally have to come under the high risk bracket. Right. Because there are different things that the police can do to help you stay safe. They can offer you alarms. They have an app now where you can directly upload information and evidence to that app, etc. They will have those specially trained officers who have that extra knowledge and experience about domestic abuse to help you. If you don't come into that bracket, then you tend to be signposted to Victims First or Victim Support or those kind of organisations who can offer you a little bit of ongoing support and practical help and signposting.
Wow, there's so much to this, isn't there? So it sounds to me like contacting a charitable organisation who has IDVAs working within it is pretty important when you feel like you've been in an abusive relationship. That's almost the first port of call. Is that
Definitely.
kind of what your thought is? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I always recommend for people to contact them because it's free for a start. It doesn't cost you a penny. They are the specialists, you know, they get it. There's not going to be any judgment when you call up or when you email them and you ask for help, right? They're going to do the risk assessment. So they're going to have that professional knowledge and understanding about how to best support you. And then they will be able to offer you whatever appropriate support they feel you need. Okay, so it's about opening up your support network and getting as much support as possible. A lot of people feel like, oh, I shouldn't go to a domestic abuse organisation because, you know, there's other people that are much more in need than I am. You know, I hear that a lot. And I'm like, no, go to them. You know, that's what they're there for. They're there to help you. If they can't help you, they will tell you. All right.
Yeah.
But ask. There's no harm in asking, is there?
Absolutely.
Go to them,
definitely.
ask, get that validation from them. You know, that everything you're worried about, you're right to be worried about.
Yeah.
You know, get that support, get that emotional support, get that practical help if they can offer it to you. Yeah,
definitely. So is it best to start with the domestic abuse helpline? Is it best to start with Women's Aid if you're female? Is it best to start with your local service? Like where should somebody go first?
So you can ring the National Domestic Violence Helpline. That has a database of all of the domestic abuse organisations. Those organisations and the support, again, you know, they do change from time to time. So you can, you know, if you're not sure where to look, that's an easy thing to do, is to just Google the National Domestic Violence Helpline. It's open 24 hours a day. You might have to keep calling to get through because obviously it's inundated. But you can do that. They will essentially signpost you anyway to your local domestic abuse organisation. So if you just Google domestic abuse support in whatever town you live in, it will usually come up with your local organisation. It might not be called Women's Aid, it might be called something else, it might be called Solace or you know, other names of organisations, but it will tell you who is in your area, or it will give you the link to the local council website, which usually has a domestic abuse page on there, right? And it tells you who to contact, because for some cities as well, they're broken up into different geographical areas. So say you live in West Sussex compared to East Sussex, there might be two different organisations. So just Google really and look and see what you can find out, and then call them or email them and just say, this is my situation, you know, I feel I need some support, how can you help? And they'll take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that you said before about people feeling that you said that when somebody contacts a service, they're not going to get any judgment. And I just wanted to touch on this because this is something that I get all of the time, is people saying, I feel so stupid that I've let this happen. And I just wanted to talk on that for a bit because that breaks my heart, because abusers are subtle, they're devious, they're generally coercive. They know what they're doing to manipulate the situation. And you know, nobody who speaks to me about their experience is going to receive judgment of me thinking like they should have known better and they should have worked it out earlier, because that, you know, we're all human, and that these abusers are following a pattern, as you said, that's kind of always down the same process, isn't it? So I just wondered if you could talk on that for a bit, because I just think that's really important.
Sure. Before I do, I just want to go back quickly before I forget about them.
Sure.
Right, because men do find it difficult to reach out for support.
Sure.
And again, just Google domestic abuse support for men in my area and it will come up. Lots of domestic abuse organisations do support men now as well as women. and have very good support. So definitely go to them, or you can look at the Mankind UK website. They have a helpline too. They can call them. But yeah, there definitely is support for men out there now. They don't feel like they have to struggle on their own.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. I think that's really important, because I think in a way men find it even more difficult than women to come forward, and it almost feels like they're just like saying something against their gender if they come forward. Like, they should be able to cope with it. This shouldn't be happening to them. And it, you know, I think probably we know even less of the extent of domestic abuse against men than we do about women, because there's this fear of coming forward. So yeah, thank you for that.
There is that. And a lot, I mean, I've definitely seen an increase in male clients coming forward, which is good.
Which is good.
You know, it's good that they're coming forward to get that
sad,
support.
but it's good.
Yeah, I know, it's sad, but it's good. And a lot of men will quite often prefer to come to somebody like a coach rather than go to a domestic abuse organisation that predominantly supports women. You know, it's just that feeling of having that confidential support just on a one-to-one basis. I don't know, men just seem to prefer that sometimes, but there are great organisations out there that can support men. There are unfortunately very few men only organisations, you know, again through for funding reasons and all that kind of stuff. But Mankind UK are a great organisation who are doing a lot of the campaign for men. So going back to what you were talking about with people feeling like they should have been able to spot the signs sooner, it's very common to carry that guilt and to feel the weight of, you know, being the person to make the decision and breaking up the family, etc. But yeah, nobody has a crystal ball, right? You know, you only know what you know at the time. When you went into the relationship, you didn't know it was going to turn out like this. Otherwise, you wouldn't have stayed in it, right? You know, you would have got out sooner. But it drip feeds in over time. And usually by the time you realise what's happening, you are tied together with that person. You have a life together. You have a home. You have shared friends. You have children together. And then it's very difficult to leave. So yeah, it's not uncommon to think, oh, I should have left sooner, or I'm so stupid. You know, you're not stupid. You know, you want to believe the best in the person, right? You don't want to accept that this person is intentionally hurting you, you know, whether that's emotionally or physically. You know, you want to try and do your best to fix things, to keep your relationship going, to make it happier and better and all the rest of it. But of course, you're not the problem. So, you know, it doesn't matter what you do, it's not going to work. And it's a process that you go through, you know, to get to that point where you realize that this relationship is not good. And for some people that takes many years. For some people it takes a few months. You know, everybody's different, but you need to let go of that guilt for not spotting it sooner, because it's not your fault.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are things that have been happening that you don't necessarily spot, or you have been coerced into believing that these things are being done for your good and the family's good. So don't worry about the money, I will look after it. Don't bother yourself with it. You don't need to know.
They are expert liars, expert manipulators. They know exactly what to say and do to keep you under their control, really, you know, because it's all based on having power and control over you. And they create this culture of fear and dependence in your relationship. So they want you to believe that, you know, they're right and you're wrong. They want you to doubt yourself. They want to destroy your confidence and your self-esteem, you know, and they will do whatever it takes.
It's just really saddening and frustrating that people say also so as if it so responsible for what's happened to them, and it's such a shame. Okay, so accessing IDVAs is only available via charities. It sort of feels from everything that we've talked about so far that it would be really useful if some people in the wider world could do IDVA training and be available on a private, like to have that service, you know, if they have the funds available, which as we talked about isn't everybody, but to have that available for people to go training, to be able to train and be able to do that work in the wider world if there was the availability of funding to pay for it. Are there any plans for that to happen?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of, unfortunately. The only plans are, like I said, to fund the IDVAs in the charitable sector to do that work within the family court. But, you know, that's 300, and you know how much work there is and how much need there is for that kind of support. And yeah, I can offer it in court, but I'm one person and there's only so many court hearings that I can attend, and you know, I'm only in the southeast, so you know, for people in the north there's definitely a need. And you know, more court hearings are moving away from virtual to in-person now again, which again is going to limit the ability for IDVAs to attend. So yeah, it's definitely an area that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, and it strikes me that it's not just in court hearings, but actually having that person there to hold your hand.
Yeah, that longer term support, there's definitely a need for it. There's definitely a need for longer term support. I've had some of my clients for 5 years. You know, when the clients come to me for coaching, there's no closure date. All right, you don't do 6 sessions and then go away and carry on with your life, because post-separation abuse goes on for years. And you know, I work with people when the court system has finished, when the divorce is over, you know, when they've moved house and they've moved on. I still work with them because there are still issues that crop up from time to time. And my clients still have wobbly moments and they still feel exhausted with the constant barrage of abuse that comes their way. You know, we're just coming to the end of summer holidays. That's been a nightmare for some of my clients. And they've got court orders and child arrangement orders and what have you. But again, these master manipulators, you know, their behavior doesn't change. It doesn't change just because they're out of court. It doesn't change just because the risk is reduced. You know, they are who they are. And all the time while you've got children with that person, or you've got some connection and some link, they still want to have that control over you.
Yeah, absolutely. Post-separation abuse is just, it's unfathomably terrifying that how it, you know, you kind of assume, oh, well, the divorce is done, the court orders are made. Well, these are people who don't care about court orders. They're not interested in what a court order tells them they can or can't or have to or haven't to do. It's not relevant. They're not going to abide by a piece of paper from a court, unfortunately.
And to be honest, the IDVAs that work in the charitable sector are not always the experts in family court stuff, because that stuff happens after their cases have closed. Whereas, you know, with family court stuff, you really have got to have that knowledge about what to put into your child arrangement order, what you should be asking for in terms of your finances and that. And that's where they need people like you and myself, and, you know, people that work within that kind of post-separation arena to give them that specialist advice. Because if you don't know what you should be putting in your child arrangement order, if you don't know what you should be challenging in terms of finances, you can really come unstuck later on, and it can make your life a lot harder.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it feels like there's a massive gap that that need, well, I mean, not that I didn't think that before I started talking to you today, but it feels like there's an even bigger gap where something could be done if only the training were available kind of on a wider scale, because I know there are many of us professionals, and we're going to speak to quite a lot of them over the course of this series, who are, you know, passionately want to see changes made and want to support survivors, but in some ways are, you know, hands tied just from a lack of training and the lack of ability to, you know, to support these survivors in the way that they potentially could. It's another one to add to the list of changes we'd like to see.
The long list.
Oh, it's a very long list. Tell me a bit about if and obviously no names and so on, but a bit about how you might support somebody who was in court as an IDVA, because I mean, I can only imagine that courts are a pretty terrifying place to be in the first place. Presumably they are facing the perpetrator and being in the same room as them, potentially for the first time for a long time. How do you support them, and are they generally also supported by solicitors and barristers, or are they generally litigants in person?
So it could be either. So I support clients who have a legal team and clients that are representing themselves. A lot of clients are representing themselves now because of the financial abuse and the fact that they struggle to access legal aid and they struggle to afford legal help. So quite often they do end up having to represent themselves in hearings. And that can be, mightily scary when you're going to try and stand up for yourself and find your voice against the person that's abused you, and also within a system that you don't really understand. You know, you've never probably been to court in your life before, and all of a sudden you're trying to fight for your children and fight, you know, for finances to put a roof over your head and survive, right? So these are important big things that you're fighting for. So if I've got a client who's got a legal team, it can work really well because the legal team can focus on their job and doing what they need to do in terms of standing up and advocating for their client, and I can support the client with their emotions and help keep them grounded and calm and do all the explaining about what's happening. So that can work really well. And also in the past, I've managed to support clients with, you know, when they've had to make big decisions on the day, you know, they've had to think about, okay, right, let's draft this child arrangement order now. You know, what do we need? What do we want to put in it? I can then help the barrister write it by saying, well, these are the common, you know, points of conflict that my clients typically have, you know, the typical types of post-separation abuse. So maybe word it like this, or put this bit of detail in it, and that will ensure that, you know, hopefully that limits those points of conflict, and, you know, and the child arrangement actually works better for that client. So we can work as a real team with that client. And if clients are representing themselves, then it's nice to be able to have somebody sit beside you in court, you know. So I can contact the court beforehand and make sure they've got their special measures. So make sure they maybe have got a separate entrance to the court from the abuser, make sure they've got a separate waiting room, make sure they've got a screen in court, and sit right beside the survivor, explain everything that's happening. If they don't understand something, if they're not sure about any of the jargon that gets used in court, I can give them quite bits of advice in court and encourage them. You know, we use lots of lavender spray and things like that to just kind of, you know, calm the nervous system a little bit. Make sure that they're never on their own at any point. You know, we go to the toilet together, we go to lunch together. I literally stick to them like glue all the time. And then we can have a debrief afterwards. You know, how's it gone? What went well? What didn't go so well? You know, what are the next steps? So they're really clear on what's happening, and I write comprehensive notes as we go through the hearing, and then type them up afterwards so that then they can go away and digest it, right?
Yeah.
Because it's really hard to pick up on everything that's happening in court when you're trying to speak up for yourself. You're trying to listen to the other side. You're nervous anyway. So to have somebody that's there listening, picking up on things, doing a bit of that work for you, writing it down so you don't forget, you know, you've got really clear, comprehensive notes, it can really help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that clients in this position have said to me is that their fear is around not being believed, because they, in court, because they have been a victim of abuse, come across perhaps more timid, more meek, less confident of what they're saying, and the perpetrator is going to come across as very confident, very likable, very aware of what they're saying. They probably have a more expensive legal team in many cases, that they're kind of presenting their case as the truth, be all and end all, and because of their nature and their lies and the way that they coerce, that the victim survivor often feels that they're not going to be believed by the judge, by whoever else is in the room, and that they're going to lose out because of that. Is there anything that you can recommend to help that person who's going into the court, who's the victim survivor, can do to reassure them, to put them in a better position, other than having you by their side, which, you know, if we could multiply you several hundred times, we would do, but
it is a very difficult situation, and sometimes, you know, the abusers can come across as very charming, you know.
Absolutely.
Sometimes they can lose their rag in court, you know, and when they're backed into a corner or they're challenged, their true colours really can come out. So sometimes they can trip themselves up, you know.
Yeah.
And I think for survivors, it is just really about being brave and realizing this is your best shot to get what you need for the next couple of years or whatever, you know, however long you're looking at here in terms of your children, in terms of your finances. You've got to dig deep. You've got to be brave, and you've got to find that inner strength from somewhere to stand up for what is right, to stand up for what you believe in, to find your voice, to challenge and say, do you know what? I'm not scared of you anymore, right? I am going to stand up. I am going to tell the world, you know, what you've done. I am going to, you know, fight for my children, and I am going to fight for myself now, right? Yeah. Because if you don't, you know, the chances are they might just believe the other side. You know, quite often it is one person's word against the other. Facts are absolutely key. So the more evidence you have, the more facts you have, the better. It is absolutely about trying to stay calm and focused, right? Trying not to let the emotions overwhelm you, because it's natural to be emotional. It's natural to feel scared and worried and panicked and all of those things. But if you let those emotions overwhelm you, it's not going to help you. All right. And this is your one chance to do your best. Okay.
Yeah.
And you have to go in there thinking positive. Even if the last court hearing didn't go so well, you've got to go back into the next court hearing thinking this is a fresh start. Yeah. Might even be the same judge, right? But you've got to go in there with a positive mindset from the beginning. And if things don't go so well for you, you've got to think, right, okay, they've not gone so well, but what can I do now? How do I deal with it? How do I work around it? How do I make it better?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And just
lavender spray. Lavender spray is a good.
Oh, I go through loads of lavender. Lavender, and another top tip is get a stress ball as well, you know, or a makeup sponge or something that you can squeeze or fidget with. Put it in your pocket. Nobody knows it's there, right? If you start to feel a bit stressed, a bit emotional, just keep opening and closing your hand like that in your pocket, right? Nobody knows what's happening. And the reason why you open and close your hand all the time is it distracts you, all right, from what's going on, all right? It grounds your emotions a little bit because you're focusing on that open, close, open, close, open, close, right? And it just takes the edge off. Okay. It's just a really simple thing that can just help that stop that overwhelm, right? But if you do get overwhelmed, you know, you're a human being, you're not a robot, all right? Just try to take a few deep breaths, right? Or have a glass of water, just take a pause, take a minute, and then get back on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Bit of meditation potentially beforehand, practice breathing, all those sorts of relaxation techniques are gonna help put you in the right place, because as you say, frightening as it is, you do have one chance, and this is about trying to get this right for the rest of rest of your life. You know, if you're talking about finances, it's getting the right outcome for you, and you want to fight calmly for all this, I think. We're coming to the end of our time together, sadly. It's been fabulous talking to you. Have you got anything you want to add before we go?
I suppose just to give people hope, all right? You know, we talk about a lot of challenges and a lot of negatives, you know, that come with leaving these relationships. They are not easy to leave. You know, people that are controlling do not give up that control easily. Of course, they're not going to make it easy for you, right? But it is possible, okay? And if you're going through court, you know, whatever happens, you can deal with it, right? There is life afterwards. You can absolutely make a better life. You know, you don't have to put up with this kind of behavior. And there's no point thinking, oh, should I have stayed because it would have been better? No, it wouldn't. It would have just got worse over time. So, you know, cut your losses, deal with it. You know, it's a bit like ripping off a plaster. You just have to do it and be done with it and get yourself out the other side. And then you can start healing and you can start rebuilding, whatever that looks like.
Absolutely. And we are, you know, we've talked about post-separation abuse, but it is still better being away than being in that relationship. And
absolutely
it is important.
I've got lots of clients who, you know, still really struggle, but if you ask them, you know, would you prefer life now compared to what it was like before? 100% they would still have it now, right? Rather than how it was before. Because even though there are difficult moments, they're just moments, right? It's not constant, it's not all the time. And they use some strategies and they have some boundaries and things to try and make sure that that post-separation abuse still allows them to get on with their life.
Yeah, absolutely. Caron, thank you so much for joining me today. If you're struggling with anything that we've talked about today, there will be links to get hold of Caron. We'll put the domestic abuse helpline link there. Just please do reach out to somebody, because we know that there is help out there. But thank you for listening, Caron. Thank you for joining me. If you have found today's episode useful, please do give us a 5-star review, because it means that we can help more people and get these episodes out to more people who need us. So thank you very much.